My name is Farah El-Masri, and this morning, the landlord who tried to evict me for my Moroccan accent is watching the police seize every property he owns while my husband, the man he once tried to impress, holds my hand. They say that in London, power is built on stone and mortar, but I've learned that true power is built on silence, timing, and knowing exactly when to strike. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in the place you called home? Tell me your story in the comments. I arrived in London 6 years ago, carrying the scent of jasmine from Casablanca, and a heart full of dreams that felt too big for my suitcases. I am an accountant by trade, a woman of numbers, logic, and meticulous detail. I spent years working in the shadows of glass skyscrapers, proving my worth, until I finally saved enough to rent a beautiful, sun-drenched flat in Kensington. It was my sanctuary, the place where I felt I had finally earned my seat at the table of the Western world. But to Arthur Penhaligon, I was never a professional or a tenant. I was simply a foreign girl with a temporary lease on a life he thought I didn't deserve. Arthur was a man of fading prestige and growing greed. He managed a portfolio of historic buildings, hiding his crumbling finances behind gold-plated watches and an arrogant sneer. The moment I told him I was pregnant, the mask of the professional landlord slipped. He didn't see a joyful milestone. He saw an opportunity to exploit a woman he assumed had no one to protect her. He walked into my home uninvited, smelling of expensive gin and cheap malice, and told me that my status had changed. He demanded a bribe, £2,000 a month in supplemental insurance, or he would find a way to make me homeless before the first trimester was over. "You have to understand, Farah," he had said, pacing my living room as if he already owned the air I breathed. "A pregnant immigrant is a liability. The council, the neighbors, they don't want the noise. You pay the fee, or I'll have the locks changed by Monday. Who are you going to tell? You barely sound like you belong in this neighborhood." I felt the heat of humiliation rise in my chest, a familiar burn that many outsiders know all too well. He thought my silence was fear. He thought my trembling hands were a sign of surrender. What he didn't realize was that I am an accountant. I don't just see numbers, I see patterns. And I had already begun to see the cracks in Arthur's empire. I began to document everything. Every late-night knock, every derogatory comment about my heritage, every illegal demand for cash. I kept my head down, I worked my long hours at the firm, and I waited. But I wasn't waiting alone. Julian Cross is a name that commands silence in the boardrooms of the city. He is a British man of old money and new power, a titan in property financing with a reputation for being as cold as the Thames in midwinter. To the world, he is a mystery. To me, he is the man who stays up late to help me with my backaches, the man who kisses my Moroccan features with a reverence that makes me feel like a queen. We had kept our marriage a secret for months, primarily to protect my career and my desire to be seen for my own merits. Julian respected my independence, but he did not tolerate cruelty. When I finally showed him the recordings of Arthur's threats, Julian didn't explode with rage. He became deathly still. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm that levels cities. He looked at the screen of my phone, watching Arthur mock my accent, and I saw his jaw tighten just once. "Farah El-Masri," he whispered, using my full name as he often did when he wanted me to feel the weight of his devotion. "You have been very brave. But from this moment on, you are no longer fighting this man. You are merely a witness to his end." The weeks that followed were a masterclass in cinematic justice. I continued to live in the flat, enduring Arthur's increasingly aggressive visits. He would stand in the hallway, shouting that he was starting the eviction process, calling me unstable and unfit. I stayed graceful. I stayed humble. I even apologized for the inconvenience of my pregnancy, playing the role of the victim he expected me to be. It was a performance that fed his ego, making him grow careless. He began to brag to his associates about how he was cleaning up his buildings. What Arthur didn't know was that Julian Cross had activated a network of influence that stretched from the high courts to the deepest basements of the banking sector. Julian didn't use a gun. He used a pen. He bought Arthur's outstanding debts through shell companies. He contacted the other tenants Arthur had bullied, other immigrants, single mothers, the elderly, and gathered their testimonies. He looked into Arthur's tax filings and found the black hole of fraud I had suspected was there. The day of the great eviction arrived on a cold, gray London morning. Arthur showed up with 3 bailiffs and a locksmith, looking triumphant. He didn't even knock. He had the locksmith begin drilling into my door. I stood in the foyer, my hand protective over my stomach, my heart racing but my mind clear. "Mr. Penhaligon, this is illegal," I said, my voice steady despite the noise of the drill.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more revenge and love stories. Turn on the bell notification to stay updated.
"Legal is whatever I say it is in this building," Arthur shouted, his face red with exertion and excitement. "Out! Now! I've got a skip waiting for your Moroccan rugs and your cheap furniture. You should have paid the insurance, Farah. Now you're just another statistic." The door swung open, and Arthur stepped inside, his chest puffed out. He began to point at my belongings, barking orders at the bailiffs to start clearing the room. But then, a shadow fell across the threshold. Julian Cross walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 of the most expensive solicitors in the United Kingdom and a senior inspector from the Metropolitan Police. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The bailiffs, recognizing the police and the sheer aura of authority Julian carried, immediately stepped back. "Is there a problem here?" Julian asked. His voice was a calm, lethal purr. Arthur blinked, his eyes widening as he recognized Julian. "Mr. Cross, what an unexpected honor. I'm just handling a difficult tenant. A bit of a legal matter, nothing for you to worry about. We're just clearing out some space." Julian walked past Arthur as if he were a piece of discarded trash. He came straight to me, wrapping an arm around my waist and kissing my temple. "Are you all right, darling? Did this man frighten you?" The silence that followed was so thick you could feel it in your bones. Arthur's mouth fell open. The locksmith dropped his tools. The bailiffs looked at the floor. You know her?" Arthur stammered, his voice losing its edge. "Know her?" Julian turned, his eyes flashing with a cold blue fire. "This is my wife, Farah El-Masri Cross, and you are currently standing in a building that she technically owns as of 9 o'clock this morning. I bought your holding company, Arthur. Every mortgage, every brick, every cent of debt you owe to the Crown is now under my jurisdiction, and I am a very demanding creditor." The inspector stepped forward, holding a thick stack of documents. "Arthur Penhaligon, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, tax evasion, and multiple violations of the Housing Act. We have the recordings, the bank statements, and the testimonies of 14 other tenants." Arthur looked like he was about to faint. The power he had used to crush me had vanished, replaced by a vacuum of his own making. "It was just business," he whimpered as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. "I didn't know who she was." "That's your mistake," I said, stepping forward. I spoke slowly, my accent clear and proud. "You thought because I was an immigrant, I was alone. You thought because I was a woman, I was weak. But I am an accountant, Arthur. I know exactly what you're worth. And right now, you're worth nothing." As they led him out in disgrace, the hallway was lined with the other tenants he had bullied. They watched in silence as the man who had terrified them was taken away in the back of a van. There was no cheering, just a profound sense of balance being restored. Julian stayed with me in the flat for a long time after they left. He helped me sit down, bringing me a glass of water, his hands steady and warm. "It's over, Farah. The building is yours. The tenants are safe. And that man will never see the sun through a window he owns ever again." I looked around my home. It was the same flat, but the air felt lighter. The shadows in the corners were gone. I realized then that my journey from Morocco to London hadn't been about finding a place to hide, but about finding the strength to be seen. Julian's power had been the instrument, but my own resilience had been the music. The aftermath was a whirlwind of justice. The properties were placed into a trust that I managed, ensuring that no tenant would ever be threatened with illegal eviction again. We turned Arthur's former office into a community center that provided legal aid for immigrants. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building a fortress of grace where cruelty used to live. I remember sitting in that same armchair, a few months later, my son finally asleep in his crib. The London skyline was a tapestry of lights, and for the first time, I felt like the city was smiling back at me, Julian came up behind me, resting his chin on my shoulder, his presence a constant, elegant shield. "What are you thinking about?" he whispered. "I'm thinking about the word karma," I replied. "People think it's a punishment, but for me, it was a promotion. It was the universe deciding that it was finally time for the truth to be told. I had lost the fear that Arthur Penhaligon had tried to plant in my heart. In its place grew a garden of peace. My accent was no longer a target, it was the voice of a woman who had stood her ground and won. My pregnancy was no longer a liability, it was the birth of a new legacy, one built on justice, protected by power, and fueled by a love that was as deep as the ocean. As I closed my eyes that night, I realized that the best revenge isn't a loud explosion. It's the quiet, steady life you lead after the monsters have been cleared away. It's the sound of a sleeping baby, the warmth of a husband's hand, and the knowledge that your name, Farah El-Masri, is a name that stands for something beautiful. The world might try to tell you that you don't belong. It might try to use your identity against you. But remember this: when you walk with dignity, the path eventually rises to meet you. And if you're lucky, you'll have a man like Julian Cross to make sure no one ever tries to block your way again. I am no longer just a tenant in this city. I am a guardian, I am a mother, and I am the woman who showed a Mafia boss that the most powerful weapon in his arsenal wasn't fear, it was the justice we created together. The story of Arthur Penhaligon is over, but my story, and the story of my son, is only just beginning. We are the new London. We are the face of a power that is as elegant as it is absolute, and we are never going anywhere. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more Mafia love and justice stories. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more revenge and love stories. Turn on the bell notification to stay updated.